Welcome again to Break the Cycle today. So, if you've ever been stuck in a loop, if you've ever wondered, is this all there is to life? Or if you are simply looking for that nudge to take the first step towards change, this episode is for you. Stay tuned. We dive deep into a conversation today with a good friend, Herbert, uncovering the tools, the mindsets, and strategies to help you break free and soar. Welcome.
Thank you, Farai.
It's fantastic to have you here, Herbert, on Break the Cycle today podcast. It is a privilege, Herbert, to have you here because I've known you for many years, decades even. We first met back in 1993 at the University of Zimbabwe when we were young men back then. And it's been an honor to call you a friend, Herbert. And thank you for making the time today to be on Break the Cycle today.
Thank you, Farai. It has, I think the feeling is mutual, and definitely, just reflecting on that, 30 years now, 31 years.
Yes, 31 years, Herbert.
It's a lifetime.
Yeah. Herbert, what do I or our viewers or listeners need to know about Herbert? What has shaped you to be the man that you are today? Can you take us back to when you were a young lad growing up? What was life like? And can we just dive a little bit into the experiences that you had growing up that have contributed to the man that you are today?
Okay. So I was born in a small town in Zimbabwe, and my father worked for the Ministry of Health. And given the nature of his job, we moved around. I know in my lifetime, we moved around 3 times. So with my father, being posted to different places within the country. And I think some of my early memories really shaped the man I am today. Of course, the father being the provider and us having to move around because that was where the income was coming from. And also, very early on, as you know, Zimbabwe was embroiled in the liberation struggle. My brother went to war. He was 14 at the time, 13, 14. And at the time, I was very young. So I grew up knowing that I had a brother that I didn't have facial recognition for, but who had gone to war. So, and then of course, I grew up, my grandfather was on my maternal side, was a Methodist preacher. And he planted a lot of churches in one of the districts in Zimbabwe. And then, so we were raised with a very, very strong, not only culturally traditional background, but also a very strong Christian background. So what shaped most of my view on life is that biblical perspective, which was raised within a very traditional African home.
No, Herbert, that's a very solid background. So, can you take us back to your days in school, high school? The one trait, Herbert, that stands out about you is you're such a gifted communicator. You are a very good orator. You are eloquent when you speak. You speak more than one language, and you've got an excellent command in both the languages that I know that you speak. How did you get that skill, Herbert? How did you learn how to speak so well?
Okay, so how did I learn to speak so well? Very early on, I found that I could communicate, and I was the guy that when we got into trouble, people would push me in front, and I was the one that would have to explain to the headmaster or to the teacher exactly what happened and
Okay.
how it and
Right.
what why we thought that what we had done was the best course of action.
Right.
So so I learned to speak from getting into trouble actually.
Because I know I've seen you on the stage, whether preaching or hosting a wedding. You are a very gifted a speaker and communicator. Herbert, I know that you've got a passion um, for seeing men take their positions in society. Are men in crisis, Herbert, from what you can see?
For I actually believe the world is in crisis.
Okay.
Uh, and the world is in crisis because we have removed absolutes. There was a time that if you were born, the moment a baby is born, um, the doctor would just look at the genitalia and they would say male or
Hmm.
female.
Correct.
But now we're in a situation where a doctor may say male and female,
Hmm.
and then somebody has the choice to
Hmm.
then turn around and say, I don't identify as male. I
Okay.
identify as female or
Hmm.
other or
Hmm.
any other descriptive term that is not rooted in those two, um, could we say, partitions. So
Hmm.
I think the crisis that we have is not just restricted to men, but I think the world in general, because
Hmm.
now we don't know how to begin to articulate when we refer to one another. So I think that has brought about a blurring of lines. It has brought
Hmm.
about confusion.
Hmm.
Personally, from
Hmm.
and not being politically correct, I think
Hmm.
it's an agenda that basically emasculates men, because I
Hmm.
believe that men are actually, if you can call it, the cornerstone of society. And if you
Hmm.
can get men to be in confusion about who they are, then society becomes confused because there's no leadership.
Hmm.
The I think a true saying is that you strike the head and or strike the shepherd, and the sheep will scatter. So
Hmm.
if the father or the man who is the cornerstone of the family, because
Hmm.
I believe that the family is the core or the cell unit of society. So
Hmm.
if you then remove that man or get him to be confused, then that confusion permeates the rest of society, because then now we don't have absolutes. Everything is relative. There is
Hmm.
nothing that is just straight down the line. So it's no longer yay or nay, but between yay and nay, there's now almost a gradient of, and there's shades and there's spectrum. And so it it's no longer a universal truth. We are, I think we are attacking the universal truths. That's
mm,
that's my personal perspective. That the crisis that we see, um, yes, men are in crisis. To be direct, men are in crisis, but
mm,
that crisis is then magnified throughout society.
mm. So, Herbert, in your own walk, in your own life, at what pivotal moment did you begin to understand what it means to be a man? You'd have been a boy at some point, a male, of course, but at what point did you understand what it meant to be a man?
As I said earlier on, I'm very, very steeped in Christianity, and my first, if we can say, a pivotal point is when I realized that being male
Hmm.
is a matter of birth, and then being a man
Mm,
is a matter of choice. And
okay.
so there is a difference between being a male and being a man. So
Mm,
that I think about the time that we met, Farah, is when I began that particular journey. I've
mm,
not completed it. I'm still in process. I'm also still haggling with being a man and being the man that I believe I'm supposed to be.
Growing up, Herbert, who are your role models? Who did you look up to? Who epitomized what being a man was as you were growing up? Was it your father? Was it your grandfather? Who did you look up to?
Definitely my
Were they your
father.
teachers?
Definitely my father. My
Tell me a
father
bit, tell me
was
in terms of how he ran his household, his life that you looked up to the most.
so. My father, as I said earlier, worked for the Ministry of Health, and my mother was a stay-at-home mom, and she was the entrepreneur of the family.
How?
Growing up, she did so many things, uh, but my father was very consistent in terms of the the role that he played in my
Mm,
life.
mm,
I don't remember a time that when I saw my father falter. Maybe it was because I was young, but
mm,
I don't remember him faltering. And 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 when I also look back, um, there were eight of us, okay,
mm,
eight children, and given the times that we lived in, he was able to take us through school, and very good schools at such.
mm,
But when my father passed away in 1995, when I was 22, I remember going through his stuff, and what hit me was I found his payslip from 1980. Okay, and 1980 is when I started school, and I'm the youngest, and he earned 89 Rhodesian dollars.
can you give us an idea of what that would be in today's money?
Ooh, so what? Maybe I'd have to throw it back at you because you're the numbers person. Because at the time,
Right.
the Rhodesian dollar was to the pound. I think it was 1 to 1.2.
Yeah. 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 It used to be stronger. So, so in today's terms, would that be like the average earnings of a civil servant and maybe a senior civil servant?
No, my father would have been more lower middle class
Okay.
in terms of pay. He certainly was not a senior civil servant at the time that I'm referring to.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, so the consistency, the provision, um, and how he ran his affairs. I think
mm,
he was very ordered, very orderly, um, and also just how his, could I say, his demeanor or the standing that he had in the community. He was very well respected, and I know in later life he was more of a lay preacher in the Roman Catholic Church. So
okay.
he was also a man of faith,
Mm,
and in terms of my own faith journey, it
mm,
began through him taking us to church, and I still go to church weekly, because that is what we did as a family. We went to church on a Sunday, and I still do that, and
mm,
I've raised my children that way,
mm,
because I
mhm,
found that principles espoused in the scriptures are very good, even if one is not a Christian. I believe the principles are sound and are solid.
yeah,
So when we
yeah.
talk role models, my father definitely was a role model. The local priest,
Mhm,
Father, I think,
ah,
was it Father Chifer or Father
mhm,
Mandev? I forget what the name. He, in terms of, you talk of oratory skills. Um, I would go home and I would get a blanket, for as a robe, and I would
mhm,
take my father's glasses because the local priest used to wear glasses, and I would basically recite his message,
really?
because he was so good at talking. So even while I'm saying, I used to get people out of trouble, but
Yeah.
on reflection, I think the local priest was a very big influence on me in terms of
Mm,
how I communicate, because he was a communicator, and
mm, mm,
the early faith definitely learned it from him. So as far as role models go, my father in the early stages, the local priest, um, and then in later life, I then currently have role models. My local pastor, who's been my pastor for the past 30 or so odd years, is definitely a role
mhm,
model. Um, I
mhm,
have
mm.
I have seen aspects of, if you can call it, traits of God exemplified through a man.
Wow.
When a man decides to live by principle, by conviction, and not
Mm,
by preference. And I've
mhm,
seen him uh, build a local church, which is now international,
mhm.
and from an early stage. So those are some of my role models.
Oh, that's very interesting. And teachers, do any teachers come to mind, Herbert?
Do any teachers come to mind? If we're talking teachers, it would have to be Mrs. Burr, and that's a woman. Sorry.
Tell us a bit about Mrs. Black.
Well, Mrs. Burr, she was the one person who, in a sense, taught me that if you put your mind to something, or if something looks difficult, you have to break it down to make it simple to be able to then uh, attack it. So I remember in our classroom,
Mm,
at the very top of the blackboard. Those days we didn't have smart boards; we had blackboards and chalk and erasers to take off the chalk off the board. But that is the one class that at the very top, she had a very big sign that ran the length of the board, which probably was about 3-4 meters. And it was, maths is
mm.
easy. She is the one person that
Oh, wow. Okay.
even even now, um, I I write things, and I look at them and I
mm,
refer to them. You know,
mm,
I've since grown up to understand, that there are things called affirmation cards where you
mm,
affirm where
mm.
you want to be, and I
Okay.
still use that method. So a very big impression, and
Mm,
not to be unfair to the teachers, we had one teacher called Mr. Nyapurwa. He
mhm.
was my Shona teacher, and
Okay.
he gave me a love and appreciation uh, for the Shona culture and
Right.
an appreciation of African traditional religion. How did how did we communicate with God before
Okay.
the Bible
Interesting.
came into that? So
Interesting.
so yes, there are some teachers in there that were role models.
So, Herbert, tell me something that I'm very interested in understanding. When men take their position in society and it functions and society functions in the way that it was intended or designed right from the get-go, what will it look like? What will society look like? What will be different?
So this is what I believe. And again, just going back, that the man is the cornerstone of the family,
Mm,
hence of
mm,
society. So if
mm,
men were to take up their roles, I think
mm.
we would not have fatherless generations
Okay.
because the men would be present.
Hmm.
Um, I think we would see a society that is disciplined
Yeah.
because I
Okay.
believe one of the roles of men is disciplining the children, teaching the children in the way that they should go.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
believe we would see a society where crime would be less
Okay.
because studies have shown that single parent homes
Hmm.
um, are a big contributory factor to deviance in later years
Hmm.
because there isn't that balance. And right
Hmm.
now we're seeing a society where men are absent. We have
Hmm.
absentee fathers for one
Hmm.
reason or other. And
Hmm.
and so I think society would be so much better off if men were to take their place. Like I said, crime would go down. Lawlessness, I believe, would because those are things that are taught in the home. But we say charity begins at home. But if that home does not have a head, or if the head is somebody who has had to assume a role that they were, in a sense, not ever supposed to take, you get an imbalance. And so the life principles, the things that are taught at home, would are not being taught at home because men are absent.
That's a vicious cycle. So, Herbert, we go to school, we learn how to work with our calculators, we learn how to do accounting, we learn how to do agriculture, whatever it is that we learn at school. But there's no school that teaches boys to be men or that teaches about manhood. And because of that, we've got this setup now where people don't even know how or what it means to be a man. How do we break that cycle, Herbert? How do we start training or retraining men to be men?
Wow, that one that's a big one, because it speaks to, I think, the very core of some of the issues that the world is facing. How do we start? I think it starts with you and me realizing that our role in our homes, but not just in our homes, in our in our communities, It could be the extended family. It could be the church. It could be the workplace, where we realize that we have a generation that was raised uh, maybe with absentee fathers, and we take it upon ourselves to begin to father younger men, but not only younger men, even older men, where we have a responsibility one for another. Because in as much as the role models that I laid out earlier, they were not perfect. And so, as a man, I have gaps. As a man, you have gaps. And some of those gaps are fathering gaps. But there is something that you were taught, that you learned maybe by observation, by observing your father, that maybe my father did not show me. And so we need to begin to have real talk, where we begin to iron sharpens iron, begin to speak to one another and challenge one another on our roles and responsibilities as men. I have learned a lot from just hearing other people talk about their fathers and what they were taught, that I think back and say, okay, wow, I wasn't taught that maybe in quite that same way, but I then adopt it, and so I become a better man. So that's why I say it begins with you and me, and then taking our place in the various spheres of influence and the various domains that we are in, and take on that role and become responsible for the people that are around us, and realizing that whatever decisions that we make have consequences. And so, as a man, the decision that I take has consequences. And the issue is not so much the decision, but it's the consequences. And what we've realized and what we've begun to see is that a lot of men are juvenile.
Wow.
Okay. And why do I say a lot of men are juvenile? A juvenile is somebody who does not understand the consequences of their actions or decisions. So a young man, for instance, if you go back to the age of 16, 17, 18, 19, a young man can get behind the wheel, travel at, just for the thrill, but without thinking about the consequences that, if I have a blowout at 220, I'm gone. If I crash into somebody else, if I crash into somebody else, I'm not only gone, but I kill other people.
That's true.
And if you ask a juvenile, especially teenagers, and you ask them, why did you do that? They'll turn around and say, I don't know. Or, I just felt like it. But did you not think through the impact of that particular decision or action? And so that's why I say that a lot of men, and I don't exonerate myself, there are areas in my life that I act like a juvenile, that after the fact I will think, wait, hold on,
Why is it?
so so that's why I'm saying that a lot of men are juvenile, because we don't think about the consequences. You impregnate a woman for the 5 minutes of a thrill, but then don't want to take responsibility for the child.
But it's interesting that you mentioned this about being a juvenile, because just on a personal journey, and I understand how emotionally, in a lot of areas, I was still stuck in my teenage years. And yet I'm in a body of 40, 45, 50-year old. So 10 years ago, there's no way that I would have come on a podcast to start talking about myself. But I had a personal crisis that triggered just the need to be vulnerable, to be able to go to another man and say, hey, I'm in trouble. I need help. Before that, I was preoccupied with looking well put together, presenting this super positive image. But meanwhile, I was in turmoil. So, should men be encouraged to be vulnerable and to open up and talk about how they're feeling about life?
Certainly, certainly, that goes without saying. And I'll just one of the greats that we have in Zimbabwe, the recently departed Ezekiel Guti.
Yes, Baba
I
Guti.
think he has a book, and I'll paraphrase because I don't know it verbatim, but it basically says people will not change, not that people cannot change, uh, until they go through a crisis. So I
Wow.
understand what you're that you had to go through a personal crisis for you to begin to change, to realize that I'm suffering in silence. But then,
Mm, mm,
and I'm sure you can attest to the fact that when you began to speak, um, you then gave permission to other men to be
yeah,
vulnerable and
yeah.
to share the
That's true.
experiences that they
That
were
is true.
going through.
That is
And
true.
so we owe it to one another as
Mm,
men,
mm,
begin to
mm,
speak up and to begin to speak out. We have so many instances, and I kid you not, just last night I had a visitor, and he has an 18-year-old son
mm-hmm,
whose friend
mm-hmm.
committed suicide
Oh,
three
no.
days ago.
No.
So that's a man in crisis. That was a man in crisis. And
Mm,
he had somebody that to talk to. He would have realized that he's not the only person going through this,
mm,
that there's
mm,
so many other people going through this. And
mm,
my heart's cry in this season of my life is that men begin to talk. We begin to share and our experiences because
mm,
the world has changed. The
mm,
traditional roles that we grew up knowing. I was talking about my father being consistently in work. Now
mm,
you don't have jobs for life.
mm,
So you can be a man, you can provide for a certain season in your life, and due to whether it's health,
mm,
changes in technology. I mean, think
mm,
about it.
mm,
Think about it. How many postmen still exist? Do you get what I mean? And
mm,
so you that whole section of society or
mm.
employment is gone.
It's gone.
And here you are as a man, and you're saying, I'm the provider. And
Mm,
technology makes you redundant. What do
mm,
you do?
mm, mm,
You go through a crisis. And so we
mm,
have to begin to talk and be vulnerable about some
mm,
of these things and be
mm,
truthful as well.
mm, mm,
That, we're people in progress. Technology is progressing much faster than we ever thought it would. And it's creating jobs, but it's also making jobs redundant.
mm,
And so if you looked at yourself as a man and just said, my role is as a provider,
mm,
when that
mm,
goes away,
mm,
what happens? What do? So roles and responsibilities are shifting, and we are all trying to navigate it. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
anybody has, because it's a dynamic environment, if you can call it that. So
Mm-hmm.
we too, in their absolutes, but there are things that we need to start looking at and saying, okay, so this was the traditional role of the man, but
Mm-hmm.
now where are we vis-a-vis everything that's going on? How does that translate where we are?
Herbert, when I hit that personal crisis, I went into a mode where I did not want to talk to anyone. I did not want to reach out. But I'm fortunate that I've got a few very key friends who would even drive to my house to check on me. And I shudder to think what it is like for people who don't have those kind of connections, the lone rangers of this world. Talk to me about how important it is to stay connected, to have those 2 or 3 people that you can call on in the dead of the night to say, "Hey, Herbert, I'm in a crisis. I need help."
Okay, so you know, I cannot overemphasize it, because you look at even studies that are being done about people who live the longest. Okay, and in every study, the one thing that they point out is meaningful relationships. We have to have meaningful relationships. And you talk about having those 2 or 3 people, and then I'll go back and use an example from the Bible. The Bible talks about Jesus. Jesus had the 12 disciples,
Mm-hmm.
but when you then look at it, he had his inner circle.
He did.
Peter, John were in the inner circle. You see, so if Jesus, who has totally transformed our understanding of life as it is, needed people around him that were very close that he could lean on. And I think a very powerful connection is shown when it says Jesus, on being crucified,
Mm.
turned to John and said, "This is your mother," referring to his mother. You know, that is how close a connection that they had. And I believe that just shows that as we go through life, we need people that we can lean on, people that can hold us up when we are flagging, you know, and people that we can walk with through life's journeys, with
Mm.
people who do not judge, um, but people who, in a moment of crisis, can sit, be still, and just hear you out. I
Mm.
think one of the things that we do as men is, because we are fixers, we quickly want to fix things,
Want to
but
fix things. Mm.
but when it comes to some of these personal crises, at times it's not about fixing. It's just about hearing somebody out,
Mm.
giving them an opportunity to speak their heart, to pour their heart out. So, definitely there is no way that you can go throughout life without a confidant or an inner circle that maintains your trust, whose
Mm.
trust you hold as well.
Mm-hmm.
Where an analogy in life is 2 people sitting across the table, you and I,
Mm-hmm.
Farai.
Mm-hmm.
You have your bag of pearls, and I have my bag of pearls. The
Mm-hmm.
pearls of the close represent the treasures of my heart.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so in life, I have to be willing to take out a pearl from my bag and slide it across the table to you. And in return, you should be able to do the same. It may
Okay.
not happen simultaneously.
Got
It
it.
may not happen simultaneously,
Mm-hmm.
but through the course of life, we're
Mm-hmm.
exchanging pearls. We're
Okay.
exchanging pearls. And
Mm-hmm.
and those are the inner things, the things that we carry, the
Mm-hmm.
things that cause us sleepless nights, the things
Mm-hmm.
that make us rejoice. But
Mm-hmm.
they're pearls that we then are sharing. And
Mm-hmm.
so then comes the saying that says, do not throw your pearls before swine.
Wow.
Okay? So
Mm.
it talks to how we need to begin to recognize and
Mm.
see the people that have our best interests at heart.
Mm. Mm.
Okay?
Oh, that's powerful.
That are not going to just a swine, a pig will either eat it up, it will foul it,
Yeah.
it will
Trump on
just
it.
kick it,
Yeah. Mm.
trample on it. So
Mm. Mm.
so so we too, it speaks to the kind of people that we need to begin to attract into our lives. And I believe we attract those people, you attract trustworthy people by being trustworthy yourself.
Wow. Amen.
So it then points to know thyself, work on yourself, to be
Mm.
the friend, to be the confidant that you
Mm.
seek to have in other people.
Mm.
Give,
Mm.
and it will be given unto you.
Herbert, that's deep stuff there. And when I think of sort of the world where I'm currently living, people do value individualism, and as a result, they tend to be on their own. Where does someone start? Someone does not have someone that they can pick up a phone and talk to. Where do they start? How do they go about building this network? How do they go about uh, opening up to other men and talking about their challenges?
Well, I think the starting point is, in as much as we're talking about being vulnerable, which is an inward thing that you then bring out, I think as a man, you have to put yourself out there.
Okay.
You have to go out. So
Mm, mm,
so how are connections formed?
mm,
Um, you're born into a family, or maybe you were just born and there was just one of you in the family. But
mm,
hopefully, within the extended family,
mm,
there's a cousin.
mm,
There's some, But what I'm saying is, so there's the family, there's school, there's there's the workplace,
mm,
there's places of interest,
mm,
you know,
mm, mm,
because you have to be out there. You have to be willing to go
mm,
out there
mm,
because
mm,
it's only then can
mm,
you discover the world that's out there. So
mm,
there
mm,
is a need for one to
mm,
go beyond themselves, get out of
mm,
their comfort zone,
mm,
and
mm,
put themselves out
mm,
where they're saying, you know what, I am alone. Maybe I was a single child. But you went to school.
mm.
I've got I've got I'm if I can say I'm blessed, Farai. I have we met in 93.
93, we
We're
did, yeah.
still friends.
Yeah.
Okay. But Farai, at least I've got at least 6 friends right now that I met in 19,
Oh, wow. Mm,
and we are still very good friends.
mm,
And
mm,
by being good friends in this context, we share vulnerable moments. I've got friends that I don't talk to on a daily basis. I can
mm,
go for months,
mm,
but they know when they pick up the phone,
mm,
I am there for them.
mm,
Why?
mm.
Because we've walked a journey. We've
All
walked
right.
a journey together. And
Mm,
so we've got to be patient in engaging. It's not going to happen overnight, but through a process of time. through the highs and the lows, people will prove themselves. So there has to be a willingness to go out there, to engage. There has to be that, there has to be that risk taking where you say, I am going to try and share my pearls with Herbert. And you don't put your whole bag of pearls, but you're going to take maybe the least valuable pearl and slide it across to me. So you've got to be willing to do
The
that.
process.
And I think that's how you create relationships.
Wow. And that, dear listeners, brings us to the end of yet another enlightening episode here at Today. A huge thank you to our incredible guest, Herbert Dzapata, for joining us today and sharing his inspiring journey and invaluable insights on breaking free from the cycles that limit us. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform so you don't miss any episode that we push out. Keep pushing boundaries, questioning the patterns, and remember, the only limit is the one you set for yourself. I'm Farai Vobwana, thanking you for joining us and looking forward to our next journey together.